What if light is not the opposite of darkness, but its hidden essence? Can clarity conceal itself within confusion? Throughout history, human thought has treated light and darkness as opposites. Light has symbolized knowledge, awareness, and truth, the realm of certainty. Darkness, by contrast, has symbolized ignorance, fear, and error, the realm of the unknown. But the 13th century philosopher-mystic Ibn Arabi overturns this binary. For him, being itself manifests in two complementary ways, as revelation and as concealment, as light and as its own shadow. In this framework, darkness is not the absence of light, but the condition that allows light to be perceived at all. This lecture explores that paradox, how what we call darkness is not a void, but a hidden mode of revelation. And to understand it, we must first ask, why does modern consciousness fear the dark so deeply, both literally and psychologically? In contemporary culture, darkness is rarely neutral. It represents what is uncertain, incontrovertible, or hidden from view, everything the modern mind tries to avoid. In psychological terms, darkness corresponds to the unconscious, the part of the psyche that holds forgotten, repressed, or ambiguous content. Yet our nervous systems are conditioned to seek clarity and control. We prefer information to mystery, action to stillness, and constant stimulation to silence. Everywhere, we see this preference reinforced. Glowing screens, 24-hour news cycles, and social feeds that never let awareness rest. Neuroscience calls this attention bias the brain's tendency to over-prioritize novelty and brightness, both visually and cognitively. When external stimulation fades, the amygdala and the default mode network become more active, generating feelings of anxiety and restlessness. Uncertainty feels threatening because it activates survival circuitry. So, the modern individual lives in pursuit of perpetual light, endless knowledge, productivity, and visibility, while developing a subtle phobia of darkness, silence, and not. But what if this fear is not a flaw in our biology, but a misunderstanding of reality itself? Ibn Arabi would say, darkness is not the enemy of awareness, is the space where awareness begins. To see how, we turn to the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi, known as Al-Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest master. His philosophy, called the unity of being, proposes that all existence is a single, continuous reality expressing itself in countless forms. Light, in his writings, represents being as it reveals itself. Darkness represents being as it conceals itself. These are not moral categories, but ontological ones, two modes of one truth. In his book, Ibn Arabi writes, "The hidden is the source of the manifest. The night is the womb of the day." He implies that manifestation requires concealment. The visible emerges from the invisible. Darkness is not the negation of light, but its protective veil, without which perception, creation, and differentiation would be impossible. Nothing can appear without contrast. In physics, light becomes visible only when it encounters resistance, a surface, an obstacle, a boundary that reflects or absorbs it. Pure light, without interaction, would be invisible. Ibn Arabi applies the same logic to being. Ib's existence becomes intelligible only through what he calls non-being, the principle of concealment that provides contrast. We can recognize what is only because there is what is not. Modern cognitive science mirrors this idea through figure-ground perception, the brain's mechanism that identifies objects by distinguishing them from background. Without ground, no figure can appear. Without darkness, no light can be seen. Hence, What we call darkness is not absence, it is the perceptual background that makes meaning possible. Concealment and revelation are two sides of a single cognitive and metaphysical process. For Ibn Arabi, the divine discloses itself through multiplicity, through what seems other or hidden. Creation is not apart from the Creator. It is the mirror through which the infinite sees itself in finite form. Psychologically, this parallels Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, the disowned aspects of the self that must be integrated for wholeness. Repressing these elements creates fragmentation. Acknowledging them restores unity. From a neuroscientific viewpoint, emotional regulation depends on the brain's ability to integrate negative affect rather than suppress it. Studies show that when individuals mindfully observe discomfort, the prefrontal cortex strengthens its regulation over the limbic system, reducing distress. Thus, the unknown parts of ourselves, the inner darkness, are not barriers to consciousness. They are its developmental frontier. Awareness expands precisely by meeting what it does not yet understand. In Ibn Arabi's cosmology, non-being is not nothingness. It is potentiality, the unseen reservoir from which all forms arise. Before anything exists, it exists in a hidden motor seed, an idea, an unmanifest pattern within the infinite. Modern physics offers a striking parallel. The quantum vacuum is not an empty void but a field of continuous fluctuations, a seething background from which particles spontaneously emerge. In the same way, Ibn Arabi views the unseen realm as the womb of all existence. Psychologically, creativity follows a similar rhythm. Cognitive scientists describe an incubation phase in which the conscious mind withdraws, allowing the unconscious to reorganize information. Moments of stillness, apparent darkness precede sudden insight. Therefore, genuine creation arises not from constant illumination, but from the fertile silence of the inner night. Darkness, properly understood, is the soil of innovation. God is hidden in order to be known. He means that concealment is not a defect, but a deliberate act of revelation, just as awareness itself cannot observe its own source. The divine veils itself through multiplicity so that consciousness may discover it through experience. In perception theory, awareness is the unseen background of all seeing. It illuminates objects but remains invisible to itself. Similarly, ultimate reality hides behind phenomena so that the knower can awaken through the act of seeking. Even in science, discovery depends on uncertainty. Every breakthrough begins with a question, a gap in understanding. Recognizing the limits of knowledge becomes a form of illumination. Thus, the hidden is not the enemy of knowledge. It is the path through which knowledge deepens. Together, these principles reveal Ibn Arabi's central message. Light and darkness are not dual forces in conflict. They are complementary expressions of one process, being knowing itself. Through alternations of presence and absence, it's easy to misunderstand this teaching. When we hear darkness, we often imagine evil, ignorance, or moral failure. But Ibn Arabi uses the term metaphysically, not ethically. Both light and dark, he argues, are modes of divine self-disclosure. Light is the aspect of being that reveals. Darkness is the aspect that remains beyond comprehension, the unknowable depth of the infinite dot. In epistemology, this resonates with a central insight of modern cognitive science. Consciousness cannot fully grasp itself because the observer and the observed are one. Just as the eye cannot see its own seeing, awareness cannot illuminate the ground from which it arises. That hidden ground is what Ibn Arabi calls the darkness of the real, the The more consciousness expands, the more subtle its own concealment becomes. Hence, the phrase, "the light that hides in darkness," expresses the dialectical structure of reality. Being requires non-being to appear. Knowledge requires mystery to grow. From a psychological standpoint, Ibn Arabi's insight translates into integration rather than avoidance. To evolve, we must learn to dwell consciously in uncertainty, to treat confusion, silence, and emotional discomfort as signals for growth. When faced with ambiguity, pause instead of seeking instant clarity. This activates the anterior cingulate cortex, improving cognitive flexibility. Research on meditation shows that deactivating the default mode network reduces rumination and increases tolerance for ambiguity. The brain learns to rest within darkness, the absence of narrative without panic. Schedule moments of deliberate non-doing, 10 minutes of silence, no screen, no task. Let awareness rest without object. Periods of confusion or loss can be seen as phases of reorganization. The psyche's way of preparing new insight, not evidence of failure. By training the mind to remain lucid amid not, we align ourselves with what Ibn Arabi called the light of the hidden, the intelligence of being, that works beneath conscious control. Modern thought divides light and darkness into opposites: truth versus ignorance, good versus evil. Ibn Arabi dissolves that division. For him, the light you seek hides precisely where you refuse to look. Darkness is not a void to flee, but a mirror through which being reveals its own luminosity. In psychological and creative life alike, learning to see in the dark restores equilibrium to consciousness. Awareness, therefore, is not measured by how brightly it shines, but by how deeply it can remain clear within its own shadows. To know reality, you must also know its concealment. To know light, you must also enter its night. The eye that dares to enter darkness discovers that light was never lost, only hidden.